I opened my laptop that morning and froze. Every meeting that usually cluttered my calendar had vanished like it had been wiped clean on purpose. No stand-ups, no planning blocks, no one-on-ones, nothing. Just one lonely entry sitting there like it wanted my full attention. HR meeting 9 Anurus M. No description, no agenda, no follow-up message. I stared at it longer than I meant to, then flipped over to my inbox, refreshing twice like that might magically explain things. Nothing there either. No Slack messages, no company-wide update, not even a vague calendar apology. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that presses in on your chest. My stomach tightened because I'd been here before, in different forms, and my body recognized the pattern before my brain wanted to. I'd been with this company since the beginning, back when it was 3 exhausted guys, folding tables and borrowed chairs in a dingy office above a Thai place in downtown Seattle. I remembered the smell of curry seeping through the floor, and the way we used to joke that if the kitchen shut down early, we'd be eating instant noodles again. I was writing core back-end code back then, patching systems together with caffeine, stubbornness, and way too little sleep. 12 years later, I was still here, a founding engineer, staring at an empty calendar that felt less like a glitch and more like a warning shot. I tried to tell myself it was a mistake, a sync error, some admin screw-up, but the knot in my gut didn't buy it. At 8:55, I walked into the conference room and found it completely empty. No polite HR chatter, no awkward small talk, no one pretending this was routine. Just clean glass walls, freshly vacuumed carpet, and the low hum of the AC that suddenly sounded too loud. I wasn't early by accident. They wanted me sitting there alone, stewing. I chose the chair closest to the door and sat down, forcing my breathing to stay even. I'd noticed the shift months ago, even if I hadn't wanted to admit what it meant. It really started with the rebrand. CodeRoot disappeared overnight and came back as Xeon, complete with a glossy logo and language about unlocking human potential that didn't mean anything concrete. Meetings multiplied, vision decks replaced roadmaps, projects I'd designed were reassigned, rewritten, repackaged, and right at the center of it all was Clara. Clara, the founder's daughter, flown in with a resume full of branding roles and zero technical depth. No engineering background, no product scars, but she knew how to speak in polished soundbites and carried herself like a keynote speaker. Suddenly, she was chief strategy officer. At first, I stayed out of it, let her sell the dream while I kept the servers from melting, but she didn't leave me alone. Slowly, deliberately, she started cutting me out. Meetings I used to lead went on without me. Junior devs were assigned to review my work. Emails I wrote were rewritten before being sent. It wasn't conflict, it was displacement. By the time I was sitting alone in that conference room with one meeting left on my calendar, I already knew the shape of what was coming. The door finally opened. Clara walked in like she'd just closed a massive deal, blazer sharp, smile practiced. Paula from HR followed, shoulders tight, eyes already apologetic. Neither of them spoke right away. I didn't either. I let the silence stretch, and in that gap, my mind drifted back to when Clara first showed up. Back then, she'd eased in softly, just observing, or so her father said. She offered generic feedback, nodded a lot, said things that sounded nice but meant nothing. Then her dad stepped back, and suddenly she was in charge. She didn't understand the product or the fragile systems underneath it, the ones held together by years of decisions only I fully understood. She wanted shiny features and surface-level innovation, and anyone tied to the old foundation became expendable. Access disappeared quietly. Invitations stopped coming. One day, my badge didn't open a door I'd walked through for years. That was when it clicked. I wasn't being fired yet. I was being erased. Experienced engineers were replaced with her friends, fresh graduates throwing around buzzwords and taking office selfies. The company stopped caring about uptime and started obsessing over engagement metrics. I kept working anyway, telling myself results would matter again. They didn't. What mattered instead was a document I'd found a couple months earlier while cleaning out old archives, an early shareholder agreement, scanned and ugly, with a clause protecting founding technical officers from unilateral termination. I'd saved it without knowing why, just trusting the same instinct now humming in my chest. Back in the room, Paula cleared her throat. Clara folded her hands, tilted her head, and finally spoke, voice calm and rehearsed. She slid a thin folder across the table and talked about alignment, culture, and growth. When I asked if I was being fired, she nodded without hesitation, effective immediately. Paula pushed the packet toward me, outlining my exit like it was a formality. I flipped through it, feeling the anger rise, but keeping my face still. No severance discretion, no warning, just a clean cut. I closed the folder and stood. Clara looked surprised I wasn't pleading. Someone from IT would escort me, standard procedure. I told her standard was her favorite word. Paula said my access would be disabled shortly. I asked Clara if she was sure she wanted it this way. She said it was done. I nodded, walked out, packed my desk with steady hands, and ignored the kid from IT hovering nearby. When my bag was zipped, I walked past him without another word and stepped into the elevator. The elevator ride down felt too quiet. My badge stopped working before I even hit the lobby. I had to tailgate a receptionist through the glass doors like some random visitor. And that right there told me everything. They didn't just want me gone, they wanted me small. Outside, the air was damp and cold, that thin Seattle mist that soaked through a coat if you stood still long enough. I didn't stand still. I walked to my car and tossed the bag in the passenger seat like it weighed nothing. As I drove, my mind kept circling one thing, that old shareholder document sitting in my private drive, bookmarked like a threat. I'd found it the night before, and I remember sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open, the house dead quiet except for the fridge humming. I'd been doing routine cleanup. That's the excuse I told myself. But my instincts had been screaming for months, and I finally listened. I dug through old folders, early cap table notes, investor emails, scanned signatures when we were too broke to pay for proper software. That dusty PDF popped up like it wanted to be seen. I'd opened it and started skimming, half bored, half unsettled. Then I hit the clause again and it snapped into focus like a line of code finally compiling. Founding technical officer protections, termination limitations, unanimous investor consent required for removal for any reason unless I resigned voluntarily or committed some extreme breach. The wording was blunt, almost old school, no polished HR language, just a legal wall. I sat there rereading it until my eyes burned, because I knew something they didn't. Over the years, we'd updated everything, policies, handbooks, even the equity plan.
But nobody ever wanted to touch the founding agreement. It was historical, a relic, the thing investors signed when the risk was highest, the thing they didn't think mattered anymore because we'd grown up and moved on. It still mattered. And Clara didn't strike me as the kind of person who read old documents. She lived in the new, the rebrand, the story, the shiny deck. That clause wasn't shiny. It was a landmine. By the time I got home after getting walked out like a criminal, my anger had cooled into something cleaner. Focus. I dropped my bag by the door, kicked off my shoes, and opened my laptop before I even sat down properly. I pulled up the shareholder PDF, went straight to the section, and took screenshots with the clause highlighted. Then I opened the termination packet scan I'd snapped on my phone in the parking lot. I had also grabbed a screenshot of the calendar invite and the meeting title, HR Meeting, 9 a.m., because I knew how fast companies like to lose records. I drafted an email to my lawyer, Dan Marshall, who had helped me years ago with a stock option mess. He was blunt, expensive, and didn't scare easy. Exactly what I needed. Subject line, urgent, potential illegal termination, founding officer clause. I wrote, short and sharp. Dan, they terminated me this morning with no warning. I believe the original shareholder agreement requires unanimous investor consent to remove me as founding technical officer. Attaching clause screenshots and termination packet. Please advise immediate next steps. I'm not signing anything. I attached everything. PDF, screenshots, calendar invite, a photo of the folder on the HR table with Clara's manicured hand in the frame because I'd snapped it when she slid it across, thinking, let her deny it later. My finger hovered over the send button for half a second, not because I was unsure, because I wanted to feel the moment land. Then I hit send hard enough to make the trackpad click. After that, I opened a fresh document and started listing names. Investors from the early rounds, board members, emails I still had, who might fold, who might fight. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to rant. I just needed to move. I cracked my knuckles, pulled up my old cap table notes, and started building my case line by line. By the next morning, my Slack profile had already been deactivated, but I wasn't stupid. I had a burner login still floating around in the DevTools channel. I checked it before I even brushed my teeth. The messages were flooding in. Wait, where's Jenna? Her GitHub went red only. What the F just happened? A couple engineers I'd mentored sent private messages. One just said, crying, with 3 broken heart emojis. Another wrote, tell me this is some restructure BS and not what I think. I didn't respond to any of it, not a single word. Clara had wanted me silent. Fine, I gave her silence, but not the kind she could control. Around noon, I heard from someone still inside, one of the senior devs from the security team. He pinged me from his personal number. Clara just called an emergency. All hands, 2 o'clock. She looks pale. I didn't laugh, but I smiled just a little. I knew exactly what she was trying to do. She thought she could smooth it over with her influencer voice and carefully picked words. She probably had the whole speech typed up in some pastel Google Doc. At 2:15, another text came in. Yep, she's spinning. I opened my laptop and watched the live transcript feed from the internal ComSpot, another little system I'd built ages ago for accessibility. It picked up audio from the all hands and turned it into plain text. No login needed if you knew the endpoint URL. Claire's voice came through, chopped, but clear. We've made some changes to senior leadership in alignment with our evolving company vision. We're excited about new voices, new energy. This is part of our long-term growth strategy. Not a single word about me. Someone on the call typed in, is Jenna okay? Another one followed. Did she leave or was she pushed out? Both questions got ignored. Clara kept going, like she was reading a script written by a consultant who charged by the syllable. When the call ended, the Slack channels lit up again. Nobody believed a word of it. I sat back, watching it all unravel from the outside. I didn't feel smug. I felt clear, focused. This wasn't revenge. This was correction. Behind the scenes, Dan had already fired off his first email to the company's legal team, to legal@xeon.com, subject request for termination documentation, officer consent. He copied me and the board's general counsel. In it, he asked for time-stamped proof of unanimous investor consent to remove me as founding technical officer. No fluff, just a surgical strike. No response yet, but silence said plenty. I knew Clara was hoping it would die down, that people would get distracted, that the next launch or shiny product demo would bury what happened. But I wasn't buried, I was watching. Later that night, another engineer posted a Slack status that just said, Gazna, next to my old avatar. Someone replied with the popcorn emoji. Someone else added, Clara better pray Jenna doesn't lawyer up. Too late. I forwarded the Slack screenshots to Dan. Every rumor, every whisper, they were fuel. They didn't just cut me loose, they made it public. And now, legally, that mattered. We were moving, and I wasn't done. Dan called me the next morning. No small talk. It's solid, he said. The clause is still active, fully enforceable. I didn't need a pep talk, just that, one clean sentence. By that point, we'd already sent 2 formal inquiries to the company's legal team. First one requested proof of unanimous investor consent to terminate me as founding technical officer. The second was a direct citation of the clause with highlighted language and timestamps. Dan even attached the original scan doc with the signatures. We didn't bluff, we didn't threaten, we documented. And from Clara's side, nothing, not even an auto reply. The silence was loud. I knew why. She couldn't go to the board with this, not while they were still pitching the company for acquisition. There was too much at stake. Word had already leaked that Xeon was in late-stage talks with VA Technologies, a big player, serious money, one of those acquisitions that either rockets your career or buries your name forever, depending on how clean the deal is. Clara needed clean, and I was now officially the dirt. I kept my head down, stayed quiet, didn't post, didn't respond. I let her move like she was in control. Meanwhile, Dan ramped up. He looped in a corporate litigation firm he'd worked with before, and they started digging. We requested the official termination vote log from the board minutes. We requested a list of investor communications within 30 days of my removal. We even requested Clara's internal memo announcing my departure. Dan CC'd the board counsel on every email, every thread. You could feel the pressure build. My phone buzzed constantly with signals from inside, people nervous liking my old LinkedIn posts, former colleagues pinging me off record asking if I was pursuing anything or letting it go. They all smelled something burning, but nobody wanted to say fire. Meanwhile, Clara was everywhere. LinkedIn posts, podcasts, even a panel for women in tech, where she talked about navigating leadership transitions with grace. I watched her smile through that interview with this weird mix of disgust and curiosity.
She didn't know how close she was to losing control. Then Dan called again, voice lower this time. They've confirmed receipt. Their legal team's reviewing the clause. They say anything? I asked. Just that they'll circle back soon. That usually means they're buying time or preparing a statement. They're stalling, I said. Yeah, but it won't hold. I clicked over to a spreadsheet I'd built the night I got fired. It had every board member's name, share percentage, voting history, and personal email if I could find it. A few of them I hadn't talked to in years, but they remembered me. They knew what I'd built. I didn't want to go nuclear, not yet, but the fuse was lit. By the end of that week, I got another quiet update through back channels. Clara was finalizing the acquisition pitch deck. VA Tech had already scheduled a due diligence review for the following Tuesday, and I knew what they'd be looking for. Clean IP ownership, no litigation exposure, no founder disputes. Oops. I sent one final message to Dan. Make sure they know I'm not asking for my job back. Just the truth and leverage, he replied in under 5 minutes. Already handled. I stood at my kitchen window that night, sipping lukewarm coffee, watching the neighbor's dog bark at shadows. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accuracy. Clara wanted to rewrite history, pretend I was some outdated engineer pushed out in a graceful transition. But history had paper trails, clauses, emails, timestamps, and I was done pretending I didn't know how to use them. The email hit Dan's inbox at 7:42 a.m. Subject line, IP ownership question. Urgent, sent by someone on the VA Technologies due diligence team, a junior analyst named Sarah Kim. She'd been going through our legacy code repositories, the ones we archived back in the early Pivot days, before Clara even joined the company. She found something buried in one of the old system folders, a batch of core back-end files with metadata that hadn't been scrubbed, specifically my author ID. Every engineer gets one. Mine was hard-coded into the original infrastructure layer. Most of it was eventually rewritten or abstracted out, but some pieces still active, still tied to me. Sarah flagged it because there was a permissions lock tied to my ID, a legal flag that shouldn't have been there if the company had fully transferred ownership. That flag wasn't accidental. It was a clause I'd slipped in back when we brought in outside contractors and I was rewriting access tiers. A failsafe. It tagged anything authored by founding engineers with a chain of custody requirement. If anyone tried to claim full rights without a sign-off, the system flagged it. Nobody ever asked about it because nobody looked that deep until now. Dan forwarded the email to me with a 3-word note. Here we go. By noon, both legal teams were in full-blown scramble mode. VA Tech attorneys wanted documents, sign-offs, version history, IP transfer records. Xeon's legal team went silent. Then they bounced back with 2 vague emails claiming everything had been properly assigned. No proof, no attachments, just weak assurances. But it was already too late. The analyst had included screenshots, and the moment VA's counsel saw the locked metadata tied to my personal ID, they hit the brakes. Acquisition paused. Internally, Clara tried to contain it. She told VA that everything was under review, no big deal, just an unexpected legacy artifact. That phrase actually made me laugh. Artifact, like I was an ancient piece of tech junk. Behind closed doors, she was spiraling. I heard from someone on the finance team. Clara called an emergency leadership sync that same afternoon. No agenda, just panic. She paced, snapped at legal, demanded someone fix it. They couldn't, because there was nothing to fix. It was real. The clause was real, the metadata was real, and now the consequences were real. Dan got a call from VA's external legal firm asking for a formal statement from me about the IP structure. He told them we'd be happy to cooperate as long as Xeon acknowledged the termination dispute. They didn't reply, but the damage was spreading. Clara tried to do damage control with the board. She sent out a founder transition update email claiming everything was going according to plan and that VA was still enthusiastic. 2 board members forwarded it to Dan within an hour. No comments, just the email chain, like they wanted us to have it. I spent that night reviewing every file I'd ever touched at Xeon. I still had access to backups no one had wiped, copies on personal drives, notes I'd kept from those all-nighters in year 2, code comments, Git logs, Slack exports. I wasn't building a case, I already had one. I was just tightening it. At 10:31 p.m., Dan called again. They know, he said. VA's team has serious concerns. They're requesting a delay on signing. How serious? I asked. They think Xeon misrepresented their IP portfolio. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. So they're scared. They should be. He said this isn't just about a founder clause anymore. If VA believes your IP wasn't legally transferred, they'll start talking breach of contract, possibly fraud. And Clara, she's trying to keep it quiet, but if this delays the deal long enough, her job's on the line. I looked at the clock. Clara's whole empire, the rebrand, the pitch decks, the polished persona, it was all built on a foundation I'd written, literally, and now that foundation was pushing back. I told Dan, let me know the second they blink. He said, they're already blinking, and I closed my laptop. Not because I was done, because the next move was coming fast. Clara got the board calendar invite at 7 a.m. sharp. Subject, emergency session, founder termination and IP dispute. Location, boardroom 6A. Zoom backup attached. Requested by Ted Kavanaugh. Ted didn't schedule meetings unless something was on fire. He was Xeon's first major investor, old school operator XVC, big on fundamentals. He'd backed us when we were barely more than 3 whiteboards and a busted coffee machine. He wasn't flashy, but he didn't miss much, and he didn't like surprises. I wasn't in that room. I didn't need to be. My lawyer had done his job. The documents had been shared, the emails forwarded, the clause highlighted in bold red. Everyone on that call had seen it. All I had to do was wait. The meeting started at 9. At 9:17, I got a text from a former exec who still had eyes on the board. Clara's cracking. Ted's pissed. I could picture it. Big conference table, people half in person, half dialed in, Clara in one of her trademark sleeveless power dresses, talking fast with that brittle confidence she used when she didn't actually have the answer. She probably opened with her usual lines, something about navigating founder transitions and upholding company culture. Ted didn't buy that kind of garbage. Word was he cut her off mid-sentence, asked flat out if investor consent had been obtained prior to my termination. She told him it was a legacy clause. He said that wasn't my question. She said it didn't apply anymore, that it hadn't come up in years, and it never was enforced. He asked again, was there unanimous consent? She paused, fumbled, said legal had reviewed it, but it was interpretable. That's when the atmosphere in the room shifted, because it wasn't interpretable. It was contract language, there or not, triggered or not, and it was triggered.
Clara tried pivoting, said the acquisition was still on track, that the clause wasn't material to the deal. She leaned on phrases like strategic repositioning and investor value. Ted didn't flinch. He asked to see the actual termination vote record, wanted dates, signatures, proof. She had none. One of the other investors, a guy named Harris, apparently leaned back in his chair and said, "You didn't think this would surface." Clara tried to deflect. said I'd gone rogue, that I was trying to sabotage the deal out of personal bitterness. That's when another board member jumped in, Maya from the Series B round. She said, "No, Clara, she's following protocol. You're the one skipping steps." And just like that, Clara was on an island. She tried to keep the room, she did, but her voice started getting higher. She talked faster. She said things like, "In the spirit of innovation and disruptive leadership," like buzzwords could undo facts. They couldn't. By the time the meeting ended, the board had requested a full audit of the termination, and Clara was told to hold off on any further communication with VA Technologies until the clause was resolved. Dan called me that night. "She's losing the board," he said. "She should." I said, "You thought you'd go loud, that you'd trash her online. You didn't. You just waited. That's what scared her," I said. "I didn't throw a tantrum. I wrote it down." He laughed. Not a joke laugh, just a sharp, impressed one. "The silence is killing her," he said. "Good," I said. "Let it." And then I hung up and opened my inbox because I had a feeling Clara's next move was coming soon and she'd be begging. The email came in at 8:03 a.m., subject line clean and sharp. Request to discuss licensing terms VA Technologies. It wasn't long, just a few paragraphs, but it said everything I needed to know. They weren't asking for clarification. They weren't demanding access. They were offering terms. They'd reviewed the clause. They'd seen the metadata. They knew the IP wasn't as buttoned up as Clara claimed, and they didn't want the deal to die. The language was polite, professional, but direct, exactly how I liked it. They wanted a clean licensing agreement for any code tied to my author ID, permanent, exclusive, but respectful of founding contributions. Translation? They knew I held a key. I forwarded it to Dan and waited. 10 minutes later, he called. "You want me to push back?" he asked. "No," I said. "I want to hear their number." An hour later, the offer landed. It was clean, tight, 3 times what I earned in total comp the year Clara took over. No equity games, no just money for what I built. While I was reviewing the paperwork, another email dropped. This one was from Clara. Subject line, "Let's resolve this. Private and confidential." I didn't even have to open it to feel the desperation bleeding through the screen. But I did. She wrote like someone who'd just been cornered by her own reflection. Calm on the outside, but you could see the cracks. She said she wanted to find common ground, that the company valued my legacy, that she was willing to offer stock, advisory status, and a confidential settlement to move forward. She never said the word sorry, just begged for peace without owning the war. I didn't reply. I signed the deal with VA Technologies that night. Dan walked it through line by line. No red flags, no tricks, just my terms. I clicked sign and watched the confirmation hit my inbox. Done. Later, I heard Clara was pulled into another board session, this one without her VP of Ops, without her comms team, just her and the investors. A week after that, she was transitioning into a new chapter, according to the press release. Her empire gone. Nobody talked about me publicly, but they didn't have to. The silence around my name got loud. I walked away with everything I needed, my work, my worth, my version of the story intact. And this time, I didn't need to say a damn